the population is suffering from multidimensional poverty. Education, health, living standards are low. BISP, as a social safety program, we have a coverage of 5.2 million families, which is the bottom part of the bottom quintile, and we identify them on the basis of our proxy means testing mechanism through a nationwide survey. 5.2 million families are being covered, but in the field of education, 22 million children in Pakistan who should be in school are not in school. And about 9.4 million of those are from the families that we are supporting. And then, because we are a large country geographically, the regional disparities are also very obvious. Cities and districts like Lahore and Karachi, the gross enrollment rates at the primary level are more than 100%. But there are regions and districts where the gross enrollment rates for girls particularly are as low as 9%. So 91 girls out of 100 who should be in school are not going to school in those areas. So what are we doing to address this as a social protection program? Our program is a very simple design. We are just targeting our beneficiaries, and as long as the family is our beneficiary and they have a child or more children between the ages of 4 and 12 who should be in school, and they agree to participate in the program, we enroll those children in the government primary schools, and on that enrollment they are given a cash transfer, and subsequently cash transfer is given every quarter as long as the child attends 70% of the classes in that particular quarter. The child graduates in case of 3 of the events occurring. 1 completes primary education, grade 5, graduates grade 5, goes out of the program. If he has spent 6 consecutive years in the program, he graduates, and if he is non-compliant in terms of attendance for 3 consecutive quarters, the family, as far as the CCT is concerned, graduates. Does the program have an impact? We get the program evaluated regularly through third parties, and our conclusion is that there is an impact of this. The proportion of children who are enrolled in primary school has increased in the districts that we are covering, and by the way, we are not covering the entire country at the moment. We have a coverage of roughly 1/3 of the country, targeting only the districts where the gross enrollment rates are the lowest. The enrollments have gone up in those districts. For our families, in the districts that the program is not running, the enrollment rate is for our families is about 60%. But in the districts where we are running a program, the enrollment rates have gone up to 81%. And of course, the additional cash that the families get, they also add to their income and helps in consumption smoothing. There is an impact on attendance. The requirement is for 70% attendance in the quarter for the compliance in the program, but the average rates are 81% compliant. And there is a difference between boys and girls. And there is a statistically significant reduction in the repetition rates for these children from the BISP families. Of course, the child goes to school more often, the chances that he will graduate from one class to another improves. And because all the 5.2 million beneficiaries, we have 5.2 million beneficiary families, but the actual beneficiaries who receive the cash are all women. So the impact on the empowerment on women is not just of the CCT, but also our unconditional cash transfer programs, and those are significant. We've seen that the participation in the electoral process of the women has increased in our BIS families. and their ability to move around outside their houses has also seen improvements. The future. Of course, Pakistan the systems in the social sectors are complex, particularly in Pakistan, where we are a federal country, and education, health are mostly the subjects of the provincial governments. Social protection and the database for targeting is held by the federal government, basically by the program that I run, Benazir Income Support Program. We provide that foundation. Provincial governments provide the supply side interventions. Running of schools, hospitals, nutrition programs is essentially their job. The government at the federal and provincial level are starting health insurance programs using our database. But in the future, what we are proposing to do as a social protection program, that we will continue our conditional cash transfer for education and will expand it. This year we're expanding it to another 50 districts, and by 2022 we will have expanded it to the entire country for our beneficiaries. We are also designing another program to improve nutrition, particularly for the pregnant and lactating women and for the children, targeting the first 1,000 days window, because stunting in Pakistan is a major issue. The most recent survey that has come out for nutrition tells us that about 44% of the children in the country are stunted, and that number in the target population that we address is higher. And what are the key lessons that we think are relevant? We think that the conditional cash transfers and learning from our primary education cash transfer program, they do help address the issues that drive poverty. They have an impact on attendance, on enrollment, on dropout rates, on repetitions in the classes, and on the basis of the pilot, we also understand that there is an impact on malnutrition. And on the basis of that pilot, we are expanding that. I've already talked about the expansion of the Wasila Taaleem, the conditional cash transfer for education, and the introduction of a nutrition program. We strongly feel that technology, one has to leverage technology for programs like this, for the survey, for targeting, for dispensation of cash, and for monitoring. For all this, technologies are available, and fortunately in Pakistan, we have access to them and are using them. Another key lesson is that the supply side interventions and the demand side interventions have to go hand in hand. A social protection program like ours can create incentives for on the demand side. So the family can be incentivized to send their child to school. The family can be incentivized to immunize their child, to create awareness about breastfeeding, say, as far as nutrition goes, and for the specialized nutritious food that we are planning to give out to the pregnant and lactating women for themselves and for the children. That incentivization on the demand side can be created, but on the supply side, the schools have to run properly. The access to and quality of education in those schools has to be good. So if the child goes to school and the school does not have a functioning toilet, for example, or it does not have running water supply, the intervention from the demand side might not be that effective. We also feel that to run a good cash transfer, a social protection program on the demand side for these interventions in education and nutrition, the foundation stones have to be laid first. For targeting, a good targeting database The payment systems have to be good, and the institutional capacity and outreach and grievance redressal mechanisms have to be put in place very well. The monitoring of the verification of the co-responsibility is also critical. So is the child actually going to school or not, and how the processes to address, to monitor that, how effective they are, that is critical for running a successful program. I feel finally that one has to evaluate, and we have not evaluated that yet, is whether we can run a conditional cash transfer program to address these demand side issues without an unconditional cash transfer program also. How effective would that be? My personal feeling is that these two have to go hand in hand, and the effectiveness of a conditional cash transfer program is there basically because there is also an unconditional cash transfer program running with this. I've given the time, I've tried to just quickly go over these, and I'll look forward to your questions and try to address them. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Bhutta, for that comprehensive overview. As we are doing quite well on time, what I'm going to do is to share with you a few region-wide perspectives, if I can request the organizers to put up the presentation that I have. VP Susantana already gave you an overview of what the key issues across the region, and we've heard from the two distinguished speakers. So what I'm going to do is to give you a broad brush perspective on particularly what we are seeing in the Southeast Asia region. As I mentioned, our Indonesian senior colleagues have not been able to join, so I'm going to focus particularly zoom in on Indonesia, on some aspects of what we are seeing in that country, but also talk a little bit about the other countries in the region. Is it up? Okay, maybe as the presentation comes up, we will also share with you a longer version of the presentation because there's lots of data, lots of information to share with you. The story across developing Asia is one of, when we particularly look at economic growth, growth has been very robust, very strong. Even with growth slowing down, real GDP growth slowing down, the numbers are still pretty robust, pretty commendable. I don't think in any of the developed countries of the world you see growth rates in the region of even 4.5%. But in the region, particularly if you're looking at Southeast Asia, growth has been around 6%. Some countries have been growing at 7%. Philippines, for example, has had a very strong growth rate of around 7%. And in the past few years, many other countries have been growing at that range, but certainly most of the economies are growing at least at around 6%. And the region has also done quite well, sorry, I'm probably moving a bit too fast. Region, along with growth, has also done quite well in terms of poverty reduction. If you look at what the region has been able to achieve, in the beginning in 2000s and 2010, you see a consistent pattern along with growth. If you're looking at headcount poverty has certainly declined, and this is particularly focusing on Southeast Asia. But across the Asia-Pacific region, across developing Asia, this is a picture that you see. But at the, in parallel, along with poverty reduction, as VP indicated, particularly when it comes to social protection, what ADB has in terms of its first operational priority, which is addressing remaining poverty and inequality, there are lots of human development indicators which come into focus. And if we look at them, all the countries, if you look at time splices, across various human development indicators, the countries have done quite well. Now, in that context, if we look at what we need to see, particularly in social protection, it covers a lot of different areas. We've heard the two speakers focus on particularly some forms of social protection, social assistance programs. You have social insurance programs. You have active labor market programs that have been in effect across the region. The role that different layers of the economy or society will have to play, it's very, very critical, whether we are looking at the individual level or if you're going into businesses, if you're looking at the society at large and economy-wide issues that need to be tackled. Now, in that context, if we look at across developed countries, particularly if you look at OECD data, spending on social protection is certainly much higher, significantly higher in developed countries, in OECD countries. And across developing Asia, you do see significant variations. Here, Central and West Asia and East Asia are certainly higher in terms of spending. This is, by the way, as a percentage of GDP. But if you look at Southeast Asia, certainly countries are lower than what they ought to be. Now here, there is no ideal figure per se in terms of what countries should be spending on social protection. But some countries at the same time do have constitutional mandates. For example, in Indonesia, there is a mandated minimum floor of at least 20% of total public expenditures to be spent on education. But when it comes to overall social protection, there is no such floor. And maybe as a result, you do have a lot of catch-up, as speakers, including VP Susantono, pointed out. Now, if you look at, I'm going to focus the next few slides very quickly on Indonesia in particular. Indonesia, as many countries in the region, has done very well along with growth, remarkable progress in poverty reduction. If you look at headcount poverty by various measures, the top one is $1.9 a day, and the bottom one is $3.2 a day. Certainly very robust reduction in poverty in addressing the challenges. But if you look at either Indonesia or other countries in the region, inequality remains a challenge. And hence, ADB in our strategy 2030, we made it as #1 priority, or the first operational priority is to, as I mentioned, dealing with addressing remaining inequalities as well as poverty. Now, Indonesia, since I'm focusing a little bit more, but you can see the other countries as well, inequality remains a challenge. Many countries, in fact, I would say all countries across the region in Southeast Asia, as well as in the previous picture that I showed you across different subregions of the Asia Pacific, they have put in place a number of measures. So this picture certainly is an improving picture, but you do have significant variations within countries and as well as across countries in terms of income inequalities. Now, I want you to keep in mind that if you're taking a large economy like Indonesia, it is never a story of glass half empty. It is certainly glass half full, because these are very complex issues that we are dealing with. In Indonesia, for example, over the last about 20 years, as fuel subsidies were removed, Indonesia has been directing the savings, the so-called savings from the removal of fuel subsidies, to put in place various targeted social assistance programs. For example, in the mid-2000s, in 2005, 2006, there was a fairly successful program called PNPM Mandiri, which was introduced, and also there has been focus on disadvantaged areas or backward areas in the country, and the new administration, or with the President Widodo having been re-elected, there is very clear focus emerging on social protection, as well as particularly focusing on active labor market type of programs. Now, we wanted to, VP Susantono focused on what are some of the new challenges that countries will be looking at. And this is one area, particularly the 4IR, or disruptive technologies, or fourth industrial revolution, ADB has been focusing on, we had the Asian Development Outlook a couple of years ago focus on this as a topic, looking at should countries be worried about, is there going to be impact on, particularly on labor markets, are there going to be job losses, what type of social protection schemes the programs need to be in place, what active labor market programs need to be in place. Secretary Pernia mentioned, VP Susantono talked about, for example, programs like the Job Start in the Philippines would certainly be quite helpful. Now this figure, hopefully you'll be able to see it. It maps 2 scores and places countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, where they are located. So the countries to the, as you move to the right-hand side and top part of the graph, they are certainly doing well on both indicators on the structure of production score as well as drivers of production score. But many countries are kind of clustered around in terms of these indicators in the lower part. Now, what this means is you do need to have education curriculum certainly needs to be modernized, needs to be in sync with what the industry needs so that labor or particularly youth do not lose out, or people who are getting into labor markets, or even those who probably maybe middle age, what is it that needs to be done to provide them with skills. Now here, if you see, this is based on survey data on what is the feeling out there in terms of matching between what employers need and what do labor market, the entrants or those who are already in the labor market are able to provide. And this is quite a variation, as you can see, across the countries that are shown here. And one issue particularly, in fact, as I was looking at the picture behind us, below the umbrella, clearly the younger ones, they are certainly going to be, if you look at the so-called NEET ratio, the kids or youth who are not in education, employment, or active training, this is something very, very critical that we need to focus on. If you look at the ratio across the region, some of these numbers are quite large. Now, how long these numbers stay this way for periods of time is something that we need to be looking at as well. And active labor market programs need to be designed to keep these numbers in check. And finally, I'm just going to finish off with a few measures that are needed, that particularly in the context of Indonesia, the country is looking at. ADB, other development partners are working with them in the areas of social protection as well as education and skills. And just wanted to leave that with you in terms of what across the region, the few areas, certainly human capital development, and this concept of the so-called concept of lifelong learning is going to become more and more important. Labor market flexibility, I think clearly is also going to be the name of the game. Now on both sides, at the lower end of the spectrum, as well as those with probably more advanced skills, needless to say, social protection schemes need to be strengthened. And are there incentive policies that we need to look at, tax policies, to finance social protection programs, particularly those that are targeted to countering widening income inequality is something that we need to look at. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to get back to my moderator's role. I've already seen about 7, 8 questions that have come, so I'm going to request Secretary Pernia and Mr. Butta to respond to those questions. Thanks very much. Secretary Pernia and Mr. Butta, lots of interesting questions. So since we have about 15 to 20 minutes or so, there are some cross-cutting questions to both of you, but I'm going to ask Secretary Pernia first. On the first question is, what makes the 4P program so successful? And what do you think, Secretary, can other countries in developing Asia do to either establish programs like this or to replicate your success, countries that have already such programs in place?
Yeah, the 4Ps program in the Philippines is, well, it has it did not start successful right away. it had hits and misses first, which we tried to correct in the process. And I think it's in a better shape now. And we, of course, owe some of the credit to the ADB and the World Bank that has helped us evaluate these projects separately. ADB has its own evaluation, the World Bank, and also our own DSW, the Department of Social Welfare and Development. They also do their evaluation along with other agencies in the government. So we have these multiple evaluation efforts that are able to capture what really need to be targeted in terms of improving the process and reducing or minimizing leakages. And I think that that is part of the explanation, and perhaps Dr. Ramesh has more to say because they have been involved with us in this CCT program. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Secretary. On the 4P program, very quickly, while if you look at whether in the Philippines or across Southeast Asia in particular, or across the broader Asia-Pacific region, social assistance programs have been the dominant ones, because if you look at social insurance, that is relatively the smaller share of the overall assistance. But within social assistance, if you look at Philippines, has made remarkable progress. There have been so many surveys that have been done, and then assessments, independent assessments that have been done. And the program, the 4P program, has been improving, and I would say going from strength to strength. So Indonesia, for example, within the region, we've been doing knowledge sharing between taking what Philippines has learned. And in fact, we used to have, when the Benazir program was put together in Pakistan, we had cross-regional knowledge sharing as well between the Philippines and South Asia, and particularly Pakistan. So what we are looking at is, from ADB point of view, in terms of taking some elements of the social assistance program in the Philippines to implementing similar programs in, for example, expanding what Indonesia has in place, as well as in Cambodia and Laos PDR and Myanmar. We are looking at targeted programs that ADB is likely to assess. So there are elements of success that we can certainly take from the 4P type of program. Now, I'm just going to...
I think the listahanan, this is a list of potential beneficiaries, and this listahanan had to be perfected, had to be cleaned up every time, over the years, so that it has become purer in terms of accuracy in targeting who really are the deserving beneficiaries. I think that's one of the, yes.
Thank you. No, that's a very, very important point, Secretary, because these are data-driven, and particularly for those people who are on the fringes in terms of going in and out, targeting becomes very, very important. So very important point. Thank you for mentioning that. I'm going to request Mr. Bhutta, there's a question to you here, sir. Why did Pakistan choose to focus on education-based CCT and not health additionally, although you talked about other social sectors? And this is a particular question on why education, why not other social sectors?
Because education is such a big issue in Pakistan, and we've been trying to grapple with this over decades, and have not been successful, unfortunately. Education at the primary level, and that, you see, that for the economy, it's a significant portion of the human resource gets left out, and they are then only good enough for unskilled jobs in the market. An additional factor in Pakistan is that there is a significant youth bulge. We have not been very successful in controlling the rate of population growth in Pakistan. So the result is that a large percentage of the population is now below a certain age. They are in the school-going age. The school-going age children are roughly 30% of the population. And if the coverage is not universal, that has serious implications for the economy. And as far as poverty goes, not being able to send a child to school means that you are trapped in that poverty. So as a graduation strategy also, incentivizing families to send their children to school then increases the possibilities of the families then graduating out. So that is one reason. But again, nutrition again is a major issue that we are trying to now intervene in as a social protection program. There have been efforts, but over the years we have not been able to address the malnutrition stunting issue in children. And now we think that in addition to the supply side, some incentives on the demand side might help, particularly in our target group.
Thank you, Mr. Peter. I have a question here which covers the two countries as well as many other countries in the region. The first is on what are some of the specific implementation challenges that have been faced in the Philippines or in Pakistan, particularly from a governance point of view. Are there challenges that come to mind, and what measures have you put in place to addressing them? The second question is, this is from a colleague in ADB, Sophia Shakil. What is being done to cover or target those vulnerable segments of the population that generally fall outside of safety nets that we have? For instance, street children, are there programs in place, or programs within what you have in CCT in the Philippines or in Pakistan? So governance and vulnerable segments of the population. Secretary Pernia, if I can.
Yes, I think in terms of failure on the part of the government itself, I think there's a lag. There's a lag between the need of the citizens who merit assistance and the provision of the budget, and that is it's really a typical bureaucratic kind of delay that is something that should be corrected. It is a man-made type of thing, so it can be corrected by human intervention too. So, for example, we had this problem with the unconditional cash transfer program, which was put up because of the increase in excise taxes on fuel as part of the comprehensive tax reform program of the country. Excise taxes on fuel, which increased transportation fares, hit especially the poor, and they were supposed to be given cash transfers, unconditional, as long as they qualify in terms of the means test. But there's been a lag. This is typical lag in when they actually get the cash. That has been the problem, and so that is being corrected now in terms of the budgeting process. Those outside the mosquito net, as you would say, those outside the mosquito net, like street children, we have a number of NGOs that are looking after these street children. In fact, I'm on the board of one of these NGOs that Bahay Tuluyan. It means a house for refuge of these street children, and some of that is being addressed, but then if you really look at the problem, it's really not way insufficient in terms of coverage of street children. And the street children in the Philippines, as you know, is partly because of unintended pregnancies, because of the lack of easy access to family planning services in the past especially. And that is being corrected now. Thank you.
As all of us realize, poverty and vulnerability are of course much larger issues than social protection. While social protection is an important component of this, and realizing that the government of Pakistan this year in March has launched a comprehensive poverty alleviation and social protection program, so to speak, which is an umbrella that covers social protection, our graduation programs, all our initiatives in social sectors, and specific initiatives for street children, for transgender, for orphans and widows who are left out of social safety nets. So yes, there are these programs, and they are being implemented at various levels. And over the years, new institutions are being established for specific issues. Over the last 10 years, there have been child protection bureaus established in all provinces of Pakistan who are focusing just on street children and other issues related to children, including child labor. But of course, this is a constant struggle. As far as challenges are concerned, there are many challenges, and because these social protection programs are all new, and we are in the process of establishing and addressing these challenges, one continuously tries to improve the governance in the programs. I'd just like to mention one that Dr. Pernia has also mentioned in terms of targeting. We, for example, initially when we started in 2008, which is only 11 years ago, we have gone through 2 phases. In the first phase, we tried to identify the target population through community identification, where the elected representatives were requested to identify eligible families in their areas. But that, it turned out, was not a very effective means of doing this. So we shifted to a nationwide survey where we collected information at that time on 23 variables. We developed a PMT formula and implemented that, and on the basis of that, we are now dispensing our social protection. But then there was the next challenge of doing it regularly. That had to be updated, should be updated theoretically after every 5 years. We have not been able to do that over the last 10 years and are only now doing a new survey. And attached to that is the challenge that we are now trying to address of making it a live registry, so that exiting and entry into the program happens on a regular basis rather than waiting for a new survey. The second major governance challenge is the actual payment out of cash. We started doing it 11 years ago through the post office, which in Pakistan for the last about 200 years had been an effective mechanism of sending cash out to individual beneficiaries. But then we very quickly realized that these amounts of cash and these numbers of beneficiaries is beyond the capacity of post office, their capacity to monitor and control the pilferage and leakage that happens. So we involved banks and issued debit cards, preloaded debit cards to all our beneficiaries. And then we realized that even that is not good enough, because these are illiterate, very poor women with very little exposure, and they were susceptible to agents out there in the market who used to take their cards and used to charge commission from them. But fortunately, at the same time, the ICT technologies and the banking system was evolving very quickly in Pakistan, and the branchless banking systems have expanded tremendously, and now we have more than 100,000 retail operators of banks. And so we, over the last 2 years, now we have switched to the extent of 90% to a biometric verification system for the beneficiaries. The lady goes out to a retailer, puts her thumb impression on a machine, which is then linked to our Citizens National Registry, where the biometric is verified and she is paid out the cash. So the leakages have decreased, but again, there are still challenges there, and we are trying to address them not just through our own systems and the systems of the banks, but also through the Central Bank of Pakistan to improve the regulations. The regulator of the telecommunication systems in Pakistan, to improve the machines that are used for biometric verification, for improvement in the citizens registries biometric records. So I feel that it is a continuous effort to improve governance and systems in the country.
I just want to add a sentence regarding disaster preparedness. I think the government gets credit for having improved disaster preparedness, and also the forecasting. The forecasting system has become more accurate, and therefore disaster preparedness has also come along in terms of getting people ready, so that the casualties in recent typhoon incidents have been much less compared with previous years.
Thanks very much, Secretary. That last point that you made is very, very important, particularly in Southeast Asia, but also as we see in South Asia as well in many countries. And here the combination of how social assistance as well as social insurance programs can come to work together is something that we definitely need to look at. And Mr. Bhutta, the last part of what you addressed was in fact one of the other questions, where particularly in archipelagic countries, but I think it also can apply to countries like Pakistan, large countries, where payment ecosystem could be particularly challenging when we are looking at CCT. I think this particular question was maybe more applicable to Philippines, Indonesia, what can be done, and I think the technology aspect that you said could certainly be very, very useful moving ahead. And we are already on negative time, and I see I'm supposed to bring this to a close. There was a question, there are, by the way, 14 questions, but I don't think we'll be able to spend time. But if you do have a chance before the speakers leave, you could talk to them. There was one question directly addressed to me. Can countries rely on ADB financing for expanding social protection as well as increasing coverage across the region? And do we have the expertise? I think the first question, the answer is yes. Certainly we are looking at expanding our presence across the region in the 5 sub-regions that we have, including in the Pacific, for instance. We have expanding programs, particularly the CCT programs that we are supporting in the Philippines and in Indonesia. Active job market programs is something we are looking at quite actively, because that's going to be very, very important in the coming years. Does ADB have technical expertise? This is an area where we can always do better. We do have, our skills have been expanding. We also have an arrangement called the Experts Pool, where we are getting industry specialists. They come and spend time with us, and this scheme has been very, very helpful across the 8 sector as well as 7 thematic areas that we have, including in social protection. So this is something we will be looking at expanding as well. I think here, social assistance, we are doing okay, but social insurance, we need to do certainly a lot more. And this is also going to be a function of how countries themselves are developing in deepening their financial sector, things like payment systems and so on. So these are areas that we need to work on as we expand our assistance. So with that, may I request all of you to put your hands together to appreciate our Speaker, Secretary Purnia and Mr. Bhutta. And thanks very much for your very active participation. As I said, 14 questions. I hope we can curate these questions and then we can find a way of continuing this dialogue. Thank you all so much. Thanks. Fantastic. Secretary Pernier says those questions can be emailed. So we will definitely email and we will find answers and put them back, come back to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you to Ramesh Subramaniam, our moderator, and our distinguished speakers. We will have a break, but before we have a 10 minutes break, I just want to remind you to download the app. If you haven't done so, please connect to ADB Wi-Fi and go to your Google Play or App Store to download the event app. Because without the event app, it will be difficult for you maybe to participate effectively in this program. As you know, ADB is going green. We don't print any material anymore, but it doesn't mean that you don't have information. You have it online. It's just that you have to make a special efforts to do that, okay? So these are the steps that you have to go through to download the event app. Please go to our help desk, IT help desk, if you need any help or have any problems downloading the app. One other information is we have an exhibitions by our 14 development partners at the cafeteria hallway. We will have the official opening later around lunchtime, but if you want to learn more about what our partner organizations are doing in promoting social protection, please